contrary, I felt comfortable letting it lead me. I no longer had to decide. I no longer had to endure my inner struggle or my weakness. Surrender was no longer an option. It was a way out of my torment. Deep down, I realized something terrifying. The rock I had known was dead. What remained was not a human being, but a rebirth of something else, something slowly emerging from within me but firmly taking root, as if waiting for the moment to fully declare its existence. My role was over. I was merely a witness to my own end. I could no longer distinguish between what was happening inside me and what was around me. It was as if the boundaries between my private world and external reality had suddenly collapsed. My body had become a silent battlefield, every nerve trembling as if fighting an invisible enemy. My mind, however, had transformed into a city plunged in darkness, its streets empty, its lights out, and unfamiliar voices echoing between its crumbling walls. I could hear intertwined whispers, some shouting at me commandingly, "Surrender, you no longer have a place here." Others faintly pleading, "Resist. Don't let it take you." The struggle wasn't between me and the world, but between me and myself, or rather, between me and that thing that had settled inside me. I sat in my room, sweat covering my face, my breath racing like someone suffocating underwater. My hands trembled hysterically, uncontrollably. When I looked up at the mirror opposite me, I didn't see my image as I had grown accustomed to. There was another shadow. It looked exactly like me, a copy of me, but its eyes weren't mine. They were deep, black, bottomless eyes, looking at me as if burrowing deep inside to uncover all my secrets. That face smiled, while I suffocated in terror, unable even to scream. At that moment, my body began to betray me. My limbs no longer responded to my commands. I tried to stand up, but my legs remained stuck to the ground like the roots of an ancient tree. My fingers moved on their own, slowly, as if a strange force was testing them like a child trying out a new toy. Then a faint laugh escaped my mouth, a laugh I didn't recognize. It was coming from my throat, but it wasn't my voice. The night passed long, sleepless. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open until they were burning. I watched the shadows creeping up the walls. They weren't just an optical illusion, they were really moving, stretching, swirling around the room like living creatures searching for prey. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I heard a deep, cold voice whispering my name. "Rock, you're not you anymore." I shivered violently, feeling a cold current ripple through my veins. Then a black fog seeped in from the corners of the room. It had no source, but it slowly crept in until it covered everything. Amid the fog, distorted faces began to appear, some of them terrifyingly familiar. They were the faces of people who had passed away from my life, dead, but laughing and suffering at the same time, as if trapped in an eternal hell. I realized then that I had lost all control. My breath was no longer my own, nor were my steps, nor even my thoughts. Something else was controlling me, feeding off my weakness, creeping through my veins like poison through blood. I tried to scream, but my voice came out hoarse and distorted, as if my throat had turned into a rusty machine. And suddenly, loud knocks shook the door. 3 violent blows, as if coming from the heart of my nightmare. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't dare move, I couldn't even breathe. The door slowly opened, its creaking piercing my ears like knives. Through the opening, no one entered, but darkness itself. The darkness moved like a living thing, creeping toward me, stretching its black limbs to surround me. At that moment, I didn't resist. For the first time, I felt that surrender was easier than a struggle. I raised my head, and words escaped my mouth that I hadn't chosen. I am not alone anymore. My lips smiled, even though I didn't want to, and a chill crept into my heart until it felt like it had stopped beating. Only then did I understand the harsh truth, that my end wasn't coming. No. My end had already begun. no longer knew whether minutes, hours, or perhaps entire days had passed while I was trapped inside this hell. Time here was no longer measured by hands or minutes, but by the weight of the silence and the depth of the shadows. I was walking in a long, endless corridor, its walls breathing like a living being, black fluids flowing from them, glinting under a dim, unknown light. I could hear whispers echoing from every direction, soft, overlapping voices, sometimes close as if whispering in my ear, sometimes distant as if emanating from deep within the earth. Rock, rock, it's time. The words were like a cold stab, seeping into my veins instead of blood. I tried to cover my ears, but it was no use. The voices weren't just external, they were internal, coursing through my blood, confusing my heartbeat, and filling my lungs with heavy, poisonous air. Every time I took a step forward, I felt the earth itself grip me, as if pulling me deeper into it. My feet moved, but not of my own volition, as if I were just a tattered puppet with invisible strings. My fingers trembled on their own, my shoulders resisted something that didn't exist, and my mouth began to mutter words I couldn't understand, a strange language flowing from within me without permission. At the end of the corridor, there was a rusty mirror, slightly tilted, as if it had been placed specifically for me to wait for. I hesitated, trying to ignore it, but curiosity mixed with terror drew me toward it like prey being dragged into the mouth of a beast. I looked up, and there I froze. My reflection wasn't my own. I could see my own face, but with strange features, skin as pale as a dead body, eyes sunken in a thick blackness like holes to another world, and my mouth was painted in a distorted, cold smile, a smile I'd never known. The most terrifying thing was that my reflection didn't match my movement. When I raised my hand to touch my face, he remained still, smiling, watching me coldly, as if he were the original, and I was just a fragile, worthless shadow. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a deep urge to laugh. It wasn't my own laugh, but it came out of my throat in a strange, hysterical sound, so loud that even the hallway echoed. Suddenly, the laughter turned into a scream of pain, my arms turning on me with superhuman strength, as if something else were using my body as a tool. Rock, your body is no longer yours, give up. This time, the voice was clearer, firm, like an order that was beyond discussion. I knelt on the ground, my hands trembling, biting my lip until the blood flowed, breathing heavily as if I were drowning in a sea of heavy air. Yet, there was still a part of me that resisted, a weak thread of will screaming inside me, don't give up. I raised my head with difficulty, blood gushing from my mouth, and shouted with all my remaining strength. No! I'm not yours yet. My scream echoed through the corridor like thunder, but my reflection in the mirror didn't scream. He continued to smile, growing colder and more mysterious, and then suddenly, he slowly raised his hand. At the same moment, my hand rose, unwillingly, as if I were a mere shadow moving at his command. Only then did I understand the terrifying truth. I wasn't fighting something external. I was fighting myself. Or rather, the entity that had hidden within me all along. Control was slipping away from me like sand through the fingers. And with every second that passed, I felt myself fading further, that I was merely a temporary resident of my body, while he prepared to take over completely. At that moment, the corridor was no longer just dark walls, it was an open grave waiting to close in on me. And the wider my reflection's smile grew, the more certain I was that my end had already begun. I thought I'd reached the peak of terror, that my body and mind could no longer bear it. But what happened that night proved to me that fear has no end. It's a creature that breeds within me the more I try to extinguish it, like a monster that grows stronger the more I try to ignore it. The long corridor was just the beginning, but I didn't know that its end would lead not to an exit, but to the darkest depths of hell itself. I dragged my feet as if they were no longer mine, each step like a slide into a bottomless abyss. The walls, which had been silent, began to whisper my name. Rock. Rock. Low voices, saturated with sarcasm, as if they knew my weakness better than I did. I heard them inside and outside simultaneously, as if they weren't just an echo, but a hidden call feeding off my fear. I tried to scream, to fill the space with my voice to drown out the whispers, but my voice choked in my throat. I felt as if someone was strangling me from within, an invisible fist squeezing my throat. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe, and I nearly fell to the ground had I not been pushed forward by something incomprehensible, as if the corridor itself were swallowing me. I reached the old mirror hanging at the end of the corridor. Its glass was cracked, and rust was eating away at the edges of its metal frame. I didn't want to look. Every instinct within me was screaming for me to move past it, but an invisible force, more powerful than my will, pushed me to do so. I slowly raised my head, and there I was, frozen. My face wasn't my own. Half of it was distorted, its eyes sunk in black, and its mouth smiled a crooked, inhuman smile. Worse, my reflection wasn't repeating my movements. When I shuddered, it remained motionless. When I opened my mouth, it remained closed. Then suddenly, it slowly raised its hand. And I raised my hand likewise, involuntarily. My reflection approached the glass and extended its fingers, but they didn't stop at its surface. They penetrated it like water. Its black fingers almost touched my face. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, but the ground itself seemed to be pulling me toward the mirror. That wasn't all. I felt my legs moving on their own, my steps no longer my own. I was merely a passenger inside my body, while another was the driver. My memories began to fall like dry leaves, my mother's image, my father's voice, my childhood features, all melting into the darkness creeping inside me. From upstairs, laughter rang out. Laughter that sounded like mine, but it wasn't mine. I lifted my head and saw an open door at the top. I climbed the stairs with heavy steps, and though I struggled, my feet wouldn't stop. At the dark door, I stood, panting heavily, and there I saw myself. Another version of me, sitting on the ground, bearing my features, but with eyes as extinguished as dying embers. I smiled and said in my own voice, "Isn't it time, Rock, for you to let me take the lead? You're weak, and I'm the strength." I felt the sweat dripping from my forehead, and my heart no longer beating as it had. Instead, it was beating at a strange, inhuman rhythm. I tried to say something, but my tongue felt heavy, as if the words had turned to ash. Then, from behind me, a cold hand reached out to touch my shoulder. I turned quickly, and saw nothing but absolute darkness. But it wasn't ordinary darkness, it was alive. It breathed, it stretched, and it drew closer to me like a faceless monster. I felt myself sinking into it, slowly. The more I tried to escape, the more it clung to my body. I screamed, but my scream went unheard. Even my own voice inside me sounded strange. Was I still Rock? Or had Rock died since he entered this corridor, and what stood here now was nothing but an empty shell waiting to be filled with something else? The smile on my reflection's face didn't fade, it just grew wider, and his voice filled the room. "You no longer resist. You're mine." And at that moment, I knew I was no longer the victim. I had become the mirror itself. I was no longer fully aware whether I was walking on my feet, or whether the ground itself was pulsating beneath my body, pushing me, or perhaps pulling me with it into unknown depths. Everything was suffocatingly dark. There were no colors, no boundaries, except for the echo of my ragged breathing and the rapid beating of my heart, which sounded like war drums beating inside my chest in preparation for something much bigger than me. But what truly frightened me wasn't the darkness itself, but the whispers that crept in from every direction. I couldn't determine their source. Were they emerging from the invisible walls around me? Or seeping from the pores of my skin? Or were they not external voices at all, but an internal echo emanating from deep within my head? Many whispers, intertwined, incomprehensible, yet despite their ambiguity, they carried one clear, indisputable meaning: surrender. Then I began to see faces, familiar faces engulfed in darkness, their features swallowed, yet they continued to stare at me with a piercing intensity. I saw faces I'd once loved, faces of those I'd lost, and faces of those who betrayed me and left me alone. Their eyes were all blazing, some filled with pity, as if they mourned my weakness, some filled with accusation, as if they were burdening me with a heavy burden I no longer remembered, and some with a wry smile, reminding me of a truth I'd always refused to acknowledge, that I'd always been fragile, weak, and breakable. I felt my limbs grow heavier, my fingers no longer moving of my own volition, as if I were merely a puppet ruled by tightly taut strings. The strings weren't visible, but they were there, all in the hands of a force greater than myself, a force I felt tampering with and controlling every part of me. Suddenly, a single voice rose above all the whispers. It was deep, husky, as if the earth itself was speaking. It filtered through me, not through my ear, but directly through my chest, and said with a definitive tone, "You've resisted enough, Rock. Now, it's time to end. Try no more." My whole body trembled, and a sticky chill coursed through my veins. I wanted to scream, to declare my refusal, to say no with a voice that would shake this emptiness, but all that came out of my mouth was a weak sigh, akin to the last breath of a dying man. Yet, amidst this collapse, amidst all the darkness that was engulfing me, I felt something small resisting. A tiny flame, like the flicker of a candle in a raging storm, but it was there. A tiny part of my soul refused to be buried alive, refused to be extinguished. Yet I knew full well that any additional moment of weakness would be enough to extinguish that flame, leaving me drowning in nothingness, never to return. Then the darkness itself began to materialize. It was no longer just a void, but transformed into strange, intertwined forms, resembling faceless beings. Tall, slender bodies moved with slow, measured steps, their arms reaching toward me, their fingers like black daggers. With every step they took, I felt my consciousness slipping away, drop by drop. I saw the images of my memories disintegrate, childhood moments, the laughter of those I loved, the details of my true face, all melting like drops poured into an endless sea. That's when I realized the greatest horror. I no longer had control over my thoughts. I no longer remembered why I was fighting in the first place, or who I was exactly. All that remained of me was a single name echoing faintly within me, Rock. But behind that name, there remained only a cold void. And yet, amidst this void, one question emerged and kept hammering at my head like a hammer. Should I surrender? Or did I still have one last moment to break these chains? But the answer wasn't in sight. It was so far away that I wasn't sure if my mind would survive until it reached me, or if what remained of me would be extinguished before it could even know it. I no longer knew if I was still Rock, or if I had become merely a vessel for a nightmare consuming me from within. In recent days, my mind had become like a cracked mirror. Whenever I tried to see my true face, I caught sight of another reflection smiling back at me with a distorted smile, a smile that relished my weakness and confusion. My voice was no longer mine, and my heartbeats no longer belonged to me. It was as if something invisible was seeping through my veins, feeding on my strength and nourishing itself from every strand of weakness left by my body or mind. I sat alone in the room, staring at my trembling hands, my fingers no longer fully human, as if they extended farther into the darkness than they should. Every movement brought me a strange feeling of submission and excitement at the same time. When I held the mirror in front of me, I saw my face, but I no longer recognized it. My eyes were deeper and blacker than ever, like a well opening onto a bottomless darkness. Every blink of an eye revealed another face, a version of me, but it laughed when I cried and whispered when I was silent, as if mocking my weakness. I gradually began to lose control of my thoughts. Many voices surged through my head at once, some screaming for me to flee, others demanding that I surrender. I heard them as if they were coming from deep within the earth, from beneath the walls, from the veins of time itself. You no longer own yourself. Everything has become ours. Let yourself fall. At night, as silence enveloped the house, I felt my body move involuntarily. My legs guided me toward the door, and my hands slowly opened it, as if an invisible force was leading me without resistance. I stepped out into the darkness, the cold stinging my skin, but I couldn't stop. I was like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, each step leading me into unknown worlds within myself. Yet, I strangely enjoyed losing control. Something inside me seemed to relish slow surrender. When I reached the edge of the forest, the creature that had been stalking me for endless nights appeared before me. Its form was larger and more terrifying than I had imagined, its face a hybrid of animal and human, and its eyes glowed a deep red. It moved slowly, each step making a sound like bones clanking under a strange wind. Then it raised its hand and pointed to my chest, as if something inside me responded immediately. I felt myself kneel without commanding myself to kneel, without any resistance. It whispered to me in a voice like thundering lightning. "You have resisted so much, Rook, but the resistance is over. You will become a part of me, and all that remains of your humanity will be a memory." At that moment, I felt as if I were drowning in a bottomless sea. I could no longer feel my hands or feet, and even my thoughts were melting like a candle in a raging fire. Every part of me was shedding the old Rook, replaced by emptiness, cold silence, and slow acceptance. I was surrendering inch by inch, breath by breath, and every passing minute brought me closer to disappearing completely. But amidst this collapse, I felt a tiny spark. A distant, faint voice, like remnants of my old self, whispered to me, "Don't let them take you. You're still here. You're still Rock." Those words echoed deep within me, but they seemed weak in the face of the mysterious flood engulfing me. I had two choices: surrender completely and melt into this nightmare, or cling to that weak spark, no matter how impossible it seemed. For the first time, I wished the night would never end, so I could think, so I could gather any remnants of myself. But the night continued, the shadows drew closer, and the darkness grew thicker. I stood between the chasm of loss and the final moment of decision, trapped between my old self and the it that wanted to swallow everything that remained of me. I no longer knew if I was truly Rock or just a faint reflection of a shadow that had once been human. My body felt heavier than a mountain, as if invisible chains were holding me from within, preventing me from even breathing. I felt myself moving, but not of my own volition, as if something invisible was leading me like a puppet by an invisible hand. A strange force seeped into my veins, like a black, toxic smoke, slowly creeping in and taking over every atom of my being, feeding on my weakness, transforming me into something I didn't recognize. Whenever I tried to scream, my voice echoed inside me like an echo in a deep void, unheard. I tried to remind myself of my name, my memories, my mother's face that I'd seen in my dreams smiling at me, but the images gradually blurred before my eyes, turning into distorted masks that laughed mockingly, as if the entire past was evaporating and turning into a featureless nightmare. During that terrifying night, the house itself groaned as if it shared my suffering. The walls slowly breathed, like a living creature, and the floor made successive crackling sounds like stealthy footsteps approaching. The air filled with a sharp hiss that pierced my ears until I imagined the entire place was transforming into a giant creature slowly swallowing me up. I sat in front of the mirror, trembling violently. I looked at my face and saw it changing before my eyes moment by moment. I no longer saw my own eyes, but rather two strange eyes, sunken into blackness, widening like two bottomless abysses. I tried to touch my face with my hand, but my hand trembled and refused to obey. Then a crooked smile formed on my lips, an unwanted smile that wasn't mine, but belonged to something else that resided within me and controlled me from within. I began to hear whispers. At first, they were soft, as if coming from far away, but then they became explicit commands. Overlapping voices, some resembling mine but with a broken note, and some I'd never known before, strange, distorted, and heavy, like an echo coming from underground. They chanted, "Leave. Don't resist. We have become you. And you have become us. I felt a harsh chill spreading from my fingertips to my chest, then creeping up my head. It was a different chill. It wasn't just a physical sensation, but a freezing of will itself, as if my mind was turning off one light bulb after another, and the darkness inside me was expanding without pause. I tried to resist, to say no, to scream, but my mouth betrayed me and uttered a hollow yes, a sound I didn't recognize, as if it were no longer my own voice. Suddenly, I began to laugh. A loud, intermittent laugh, but it wasn't my own. It forced its way out of my throat, as if it were coming from some deep abyss within me. I could hear it and shudder at it, yet I couldn't stop it. It was a strange, brutal laugh, announcing that whatever was inside me had become stronger than me. I realized then that I was losing control, not only of my movements, but even of my thoughts. Memories were being ripped from me one by one. The faces of my loved ones faded, my childhood evaporated, and my entire life turned into a blurry fog. I no longer knew if what I was experiencing was real or merely an illusion planted in my mind by that entity. Even my name, Rock, began to disintegrate inside me like ink dissolving in black water, leaving only a distant echo I could barely hear. Suddenly, I stood up, but not willingly. My body moved steadily toward the long, dark corridor. At the end was an old door, a door I had always avoided touching, a door I always felt concealed something hidden behind it that should not be revealed. But this time, I couldn't stop. I reached for the handle with my trembling hand. As soon as I touched it, a sharp chill pierced my skin, as if I had grasped the edge of a razor. Still, I slowly turned the handle, the strange smile still etched on my face. The door creaked open, and the darkness behind it was heavier than any darkness I had ever known. As I stepped inside, I heard my own voice, or what remained of it, screaming inside at the top of my lungs. Go back. Don't open. But the other voice, the voice that had come to fill my being and dominate every part of me, answered coldly. Too late. You're ours. And in that moment, I felt I wasn't stepping into an ordinary room, but into the dark depths of my soul, where everything that remained of me was melting away. There, in that bottomless abyss, Rock was no longer the same. He was merely an empty mask for something else, something merciless, something waiting to emerge into the world. The changes within me began to grow. They were no longer mere fragments or fleeting moments that I could ignore, but rather a mysterious entity that permeated every part of me. My body wasn't my own, and my soul wasn't mine. Instead, I felt like an empty vessel into which thick black smoke seeped, slowly filling me, stealing my last breaths and replacing them with breaths that weren't mine. At first, the whispers were soft, barely audible amidst the tumult of my thoughts, intermittent sounds like brief daydreams. But as the days passed, those whispers transformed into sharp commands, piercing my head like knives, dictating what to do, what to say, and even how to view myself. I no longer distinguished between my silence and their words, as if every word inside me wasn't mine. I noticed my hands moving on their own. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find the walls around me covered in dark red lines, strange, intertwined symbols, etched in still wet blood. When I looked at my fingers, I found cracks and dried blood on their tips. I never remembered how I wrote them, but I knew they had come from my hands and that something else had directed me to do them. The mirror became my greatest enemy. It no longer reflected my face, but distorted faces that stared back at me. Faces with no distinct features, except for sunken black eyes that widened every time I looked at them, until I felt as if they would suck me in. One night, I saw the mirror move, its surface shaking like deep black waters, and my hand appeared from within it, the same hand, but its nails were longer, its veins prominent, waving at me with a devilish smile I had never seen in my life. As for laughter, it was the worst. It no longer came only in my dreams, it echoed in the room even while I was awake. A deep, broken laughter echoed throughout the room, filling my chest to the point I almost choked on it. Every time I heard it, I felt a sharp chill spread through my veins, as if the blood itself was being replaced by another, heavier, darker liquid. I hadn't slept in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself walking through endless, dark corridors, their walls breathing and moving like living flesh. There were rotting corpses hanging from the ceiling, and scrawny hands emerging from the floor, grabbing my feet and dragging me down. When I woke up, I found deep scratches on my legs and arms, and sometimes dried blood stains on my bed, blood I couldn't tell where it came from. Forgetfulness was eating me up. I no longer clearly remembered the faces of my loved ones, nor even my own voice. I couldn't tell if the words I was writing were actually mine or if something else was using my hands as a tool. Sometimes I read what I've written and it feels foreign to me, as if I'm reading someone else's biography. On the last night, I sat exhausted, searching for myself between ragged breaths. Suddenly, the voice inside me came, louder than ever, as clear as if it were speaking directly into my ear. You've resisted so long, Rock. It's time to surrender. Your body is no longer your body, your soul is no longer your soul. You are now ours. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. My eyes filled with black. My hands froze, and a crooked smile reappeared on my face, a smile I'd never wanted. Only then did I realize that I was no longer facing a strange force from outside. Rather, I was melting inside, slowly disappearing. And so, at that moment, I wasn't sure if I was still Rock, or if Rock had become just a memory inside a body inhabited by something else entirely.